guys. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Country Central podcast. Today you have myself, Christina, and Jack, and it is Morgan Wallen weekend, ladies and gentlemen, and we are here to talk all things one thing at a time. So we are excited to dig into this project. It is 36 songs, so we won't keep you for too long, but we have plenty to work at. So to talk about and to really just mull over. So Jack, why don't you just take it over and tell me some of your thoughts.
Yeah, certainly. So going into this record, there have been a couple of instant grad tracks, obviously. We've been listening to everything that came out. And I think my early impression was that I really just wanted to be surprised. Like, I loved the title track, One Thing at a Time, from the jump. It was so different. It felt like early 80s, like The Cure, like synth pop type of stuff, but like with a pop country sensibility. I love that song. I even had like a guilty pleasure soft spot for Last Night and Tennessee Fan and some of these songs. So yeah, I mean, I was really just looking for unique, because with Dangerous, it felt like we got introduced to him for the first time a little bit. We got, ample space to learn all about like his different musical sensibilities and like the type of sounds he favors. So with this record, obviously it was going to be a long one, so I was like, I don't want just another Dangerous. I want more new, you know what I mean? Because up to this point with double albums, like, there's always been a purpose for it, you know what I mean? I think The Mockingbird and The Crow was kind of like Hardy's introduction to the big stage, the A tier. Same with Zach Bryan and American Heartbreak, same with Dangerous. And so I was like, okay, there needs to be a purpose right now, because obviously Wallen is like at the top of his game. He's at the top of the heap as far as the country stars go. So there needs to be a reason we're getting this many songs. I was really hoping it wouldn't be, inundated with filler. And in that respect, I think I was a little disappointed. I mean, I think there were some great songs. I mean, and there's a lot of them that I'm really excited to get into, but there was an awful lot of filler on this album. And I feel like with this record, One Thing at a Time, we've kind of gotten to the point where, when we're expecting a Luke Combs album, it's like, okay, we're going to get a Luke Combs album with a bunch of songs that sound like Luke Combs songs. And where we're at right now with Morgan Wallen, that's kind of how I felt. Like, I almost feel spoiled as a country music fan, because I'm like, every song starts with like a little bit of like Joey Moy affected acoustic guitar and some steel brushes. And like, I would have killed to have like steel brushes and that stuff on country radio like 5 years ago. So I do feel a little spoiled. But like, when we go from Born with a Beer in My Hand, 98 Braves, and a bunch of these songs, it really does feel like, a little overdone. Not saying they're bad songs. I really don't think there's a bad song on this album necessarily. But I mean, it was a bit of a snoozer for me. But like I said, not saying there's no highlights. There's a lot of highlights that I want to get into. And honestly, like, the ones that surprised me and like impressed me were the pop songs, like Sunrise and 180 and Cowgirls. They're so weird and so different. It was like, honestly, like, he kind of perfected the pop song mixed with country, that template. Because I mean, You Proof didn't do much for me. Wasted on You grew on me a little bit, but truly these felt like country radio songs with a trap beat. And Cowgirls and 180 and Sunrise, these felt like just true down the middle, like R&B pop songs. And he wears that hat really well. I was very impressed.
That's such an interesting take. And I think it is so hard to make an album full of that many songs and make it everyone hit every single song. And that's obviously the case. And I think but that's when I think about a lot of albums that I like, not that they're necessarily skips, but there are songs that I don't like as much as there are other songs. And I think one thing, looking at this album, looking at the track listing, the songwriters, something that we all here at Country Central really try and dig into. I mean, I really liked how, I think, even though there were some songs that were not as good, the one thing that I feel like is it all is a cohesive project. Meanwhile, it's like actually kind of crazy to think that so many songwriters have written on this. So many different people have brought their outlook. So many different people have brought their signature way of writing or their signature way of producing, and creating music. And when you sit down and listen to it, it doesn't sound patchy. It does sound like a full project. Now, that being said, it's funny. The first listen, I was like, there's a lot of songs. Like, this is just too many songs. And then, as I've listened, I would say it's what, 2 hours, and I think it's almost 2 hours. I've probably listened, we are recording this Sunday at 11. I probably listened, I think 4 times or 5 times, like straight through. And this morning I actually did something interesting. So I'm going to be focusing on writing the review. And so, we're not doing track by track. That would be way too much work. So we're kind of doing an overview or, hitting key points. And one thing that I want to touch on here, but then I'm really going to dig into in the review is there were, I believe, I kind of listened this morning quickly to each song, 11 songs that touch on God, devil, spiritual, like moments like that. Whether you take it as religion or his faith. And I thought that was really interesting. So 11 out of 36. And there may have been I didn't count getting married at church. Like I didn't count that because that's one of the lines is given. Like this was like actual moments that he was focusing on his spirituality, his faith. But most of them had like a play of alcoholism or drinking and it is just very interesting. And I think that's going to be my main focus when writing this review is how he has managed to, he grew up, his dad was a pastor and how he, and a lot of times you read backstories or you hear interviews and that's what they say is I grew up singing in church and stuff. But it's just interesting to me how he really was able to take his childhood growing up in church, being molded and shaped by his father who was a pastor and kind of melding that into his album that is about partying and country and drinking and all that. And that is just really an interesting fact to me that every time I heard something that was about a devil or about, about God or about a Bible, like there were so many times that came up in this album. And unless you're really looking for it, I don't think you'll pay attention to it, but it was something that I wanted to mention. I thought that was very interesting and very cool.
Yeah, it's cool because this whole album cycle, I don't think, excuse me, a lot of us necessarily even remember this, and it just kind of hit me the other day. This whole album cycle started with Don't Think Jesus. Like he had been away for quite some time. I think he was just kind of emerging back into the spotlight. Like Stand in My Boots was a single at this point in like early 2022. And it's like, oh, Morgan Wallen's back. He's back in the A tier because obviously he had some time away for his issues. But he came out with this single where it was like he was rationalizing just a little bit. I know he didn't write it, but it just felt so him. But he was also saying like, there's still grace to be had. Like Jesus didn't do it this way. So it's really interesting how that theme did continue, to your point, a little bit, because I always come back to this lyric from Living the Dream on the last record, Mama don't pray for my success anymore, but Mama still prays for me, because he is truly like the ultimate fish out of water, right? Like he grew up in a small town, like you said, he was in church, family was very religious, but he comes into Nashville and I don't think like any star we've seen in a little while, he is living the rock star life and he is just like, absolutely out of control. And, a couple of times he definitely needed to be reeled back in a little bit. But I see like this conflict in him where he's trying to justify like the things he grew up believing and what he still believes about, what's right and what's wrong. And the fact that he's just like slammed every single day with all of these vices and all of these temptations. And he approaches everything from like his small town Christian context a little bit, but I mean, you can always tell like there's a little bit of a battle there, and I think that's very interesting. I think that like the songs that like really nailed that were the Devil song. I don't remember exactly what the title was. Don't Think Jesus, obviously, but I think I Wrote the Book, and in the Bible, it kind of like treaded on cheesy territory a little bit because it felt like we were mixing the checklist, like I do this, I hunt, I fish, same within the Bible, on I Wrote the Book. And then he just says, like, there's one book I didn't write. That's the one sitting on the mantle in red letters. And yeah, I mean, I would really love to see like kind of a concept album just about all of these themes where he kind of like he brings it all together. It feels like we've like scattered little pieces of everything, just like maybe even a Wallen gospel album. I don't know, just something where he just reckons with all of it and he makes sense of things, and we're like, okay, we're getting the whole story here.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think it's just interesting, like you said, I think it's an internal battle, dealing with fame and popularity and Nashville and drinking and partying and all that. And meanwhile, that's like what makes country music, like it's such a big part of country music. And then we can also dig into like the drinking portion and Born with a Beer in My Hand, how that kicks off the album, but it's about not drinking. And it's like, so that was a surprise for me. That song kicking off the album was a big surprise for me. And again, I think a lot of this album, as far as vices versus spirituality and faith, and now drinking versus maybe making the decision not to drink, and I think it's really interesting if we go to Hardy and we listen to Jack, his album, his song Jack, and how it is about alcoholism. And, so many artists struggle with that, and it to be expected in that lifestyle. I can't even imagine. And so I think it's cool to shine a light, and Luke Combs, I think it's cool to shine a light on people that don't drink, whether it is because they can't or they don't want to, and how important that is for fans to see that there are people that are having trouble with this, or there are people that struggle. Personally, I don't drink. I just don't like it, and I don't like the way I feel. So I don't drink, but when I go to Nashville, I go to networking events or parties, I have to hold something. So it's not weird, and I hold a drink or I hold a Coke, and it is just interesting that I think it's something that he grapples with a lot on this project, is, turning to deciding whether he's going to drink, whether he's not going to drink, the consequences of drinking. And that is another interesting concept that I think is done well here.
Yeah, most definitely. I think right now I need to zero in on my favorite song on the album. And like even as deep as we've gotten so far into like who he is, how this project is like, seeing him like flesh out his story and his evolution in Nashville a little bit. Like this song has nothing to do with any of that. It's just a jam. It's Last Drive Down Main. I love this song. I love the cymbal. I love the guitar riff that always keeps like kicking back in the mix with the chorus. It truly does feel like, the perfect blend between like early 2000s pop punk. Like I heard a little bit of Ocean Avenue on this one and just radio country. And I love this one so much because like the production choices are unique and interesting. Like I was mentioning at the very beginning, like with the steel brushes and it's always like the same pace. There are a bunch of different tempos going on this song. Like in the chorus, it's just cymbal. It's just, and then we get into the verses, and it's a little more mid tempo, and that just like blew me away a little bit because it reminded me that when you have a long project like this, there are going to be a lot of songs that sound the same, especially with an artist like Wallen, who's so like self-assured in his sound. But it was fun to see him like step out of the box a little bit. I think they probably had fun in the studio, like bouncing around some of the creative decisions of this song, especially with like the solos towards the end and all of that. And it always came back, like I said, to this little phrase, like taking one last drive down Main. Like it was cyclical, but it was interesting, and I just love that song. I want to shout that one out in particular.
Oh, I don't know if I can do this yet. Because every time I can't even remember hearing that one. And that's the problem with such a long album, is I don't even remember hearing that one because it's like I focus on, I don't know, which one? Truly, through first listen, Outlook really was something that struck a chord with me. And I think it's also because I saw Rodney Clawson post about it and say that they had written it in 2015. And I don't know if I would feel differently if I did not know it was written in 2015, but bringing up the evolution of a song and when it is in a room on Music Row or on a back of a bus when they're on tour, wherever a song is written, to how it gets cut, to being probably pushed off to another project and then picked up. Like, it's just so interesting to me because if you think about that was before so much in his life had happened. So writing about the outlook, and I had mentioned to you guys in our group chat, like I wish that I could just ask him this question, because when you wrote this song and like when you look at the lyrics, it could have been written now. It could have been written this year or in this album cycle for writing these songs. And it wasn't. It was written before his debut album. And so when you look at all that he's been through, the success, the controversy, the songs that have risen, the songs that, every song has risen, but like the songs that he chose for singles, so much of that goes into your outlook on life and personally and professionally. So I think it's one of the most interesting songs to me because it was written then, and because it's out now. And I think, and I'm sure, like, I almost wish, we get these press releases that have every single, I'm looking at it right now, that have every single songwriter. I almost wish next to that was the year it was written. Like, I just think that would be so interesting because so many of these songs were written before Dangerous. So many of them were written, during the pandemic, before his big controversy. So many of them were written like in other times of his life. And then for them to be out now is just really, really interesting to me. And so I'm going to go with right now. I really love Outlook for that reason. But then, like you said, a jam. What was the song Ain't That Some? Like, the way he spells out country, like that's just like, I just want to dance to that. I want to sing to it. I want to enjoy listening to him sing that. I can't wait to hear him sing that one. I hope it's on the playlist, the set list when he tours. And so that's a jam. And there's so many of that, like, and I just think it's interesting that there's a song for every single feeling or whatever you want to take out of this. You can make your own little album here out of these 36 songs and pick your favorites and pick whatever mood you're in. There's a song for it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that was how I approached Dangerous. I think we had an episode a couple of months back about like long albums and like who's qualified to make a long album and some of this stuff. And that was what I said. Like with these big records, like you can really just condense it down to your favorites a little bit. Because I remember when I first got into music, I would just kind of like skip around on iTunes and listen to a whole bunch of previews and just like pull my favorites. Grew up in a very privileged generation to where like didn't have to buy the CD and everything like that. But I would do that and I would end up with like 3 or 4 good songs. And with these long records, like the ratio is usually about the same. Like if I really love like 25% of the album, that means I'm going to get like the equivalent song-wise of a full record in like 2012, like just before double albums became like a big thing. And that's a very fun like benefit of these things. I mean, the artist will cut like they'll write all of these songs and they'll cut demos of 30 songs and they'll pare it down. But their decisions on what the best ones are necessarily might not reflect mine or yours. And I can't say that like if he made a 12-song album that like Last Drive Down Main would have even been on that album. Probably not. So I do appreciate that quite a bit. But that said, I really want to pose this question right now is like, with this record being as long as it was, one thing I noticed was that it wasn't called like the double album or a double album like Dangerous or Cody Johnson's Human. And I wanted to ask you, Christina, if like you think this is just going to be the status quo for Morgan. Should he do another album this long in 2 years? Because that's really about the pace. And like, where do we go from here with Wallen?
It's so interesting to think that way. And again, going back to my point of these songs being written in all different times, it's like, how many songs did he write or does he have? I'm sure everyone wants to write with him. I'm sure there's so many songs being pitched for him to his team. So it is interesting. And I kind of, even though I did say at the beginning, I do think it's a little bit too long. There are a few songs that I just think were like you said, were filler. What if one of those filler songs is a favorite of fans? You know what I'm saying? Like, and I would have, it's interesting when you've probably watched, we're not in Nashville, so we weren't able to be at the free show that he threw, but it was interesting to watch it and sort of see the reaction where the songs had been out for about 15 hours maybe at that point, not even. And to see the reaction of fans that weren't to the not the instant grab songs. So the songs that were brand new, like Whiskey, what was it? Whiskey Friends. Like I can't even remember the names of the songs because it's just, yeah, Whiskey Friends. That was a big one. A lot of people like fell in love with that one. And it's not one that I would automatically put on. And then I was like, oh, actually, this is good. So I don't know. I think if you have the capability to put out that many songs, is it hurting him? No, monetarily, it's not hurting him. I think it's going to make it really hard to pick a set list every night when he tours this album, especially since he has 2 other albums filled with songs that people really like to hear. So maybe that comes into play. It's, something that I always think about is like Garth. I've seen Garth a few times, and he does that little, I think he calls it housekeeping, where he just lets people like hold up signs or yell out songs, and he always plays like a chorus of each of them. And I think that's a really cool way to do it. Or, take a half an hour or 45 minutes of your show and do a lot of different choruses. I've seen Kelly Clarkson do that, because when you just have a catalog that's so big and there's so many good songs, it's really hard to pick a set list for a show, especially when you're in an arena setting or a stadium setting where it has to be the same every night, kind of for like logistical reasons, backgrounds, and the band has to know everything, and the lights have to know what song's coming next. So I think it is interesting. But going back to your point, why not? If he can, and which obviously he can. This is now 2 albums that he's done. So it'll be interesting to see, like, instead of breaking it up the way Luke Combs is doing, where he had one album and now this is kind of like the companion album, and they're kind of going together, but there was several months in between. I don't know. It brings more fans, and one thing I want to touch on as far as bringing more fans, and a lot of people are, this is not even country. One thing that you said that was interesting was it's like a pop song with country sensibilities. And okay, that these are like considered the pop songs. The same way on Hardy's album, those are the rock songs. And so people that are complaining that this is not country, well, the first half of the album we know is country, and the second half is country lyrics with like a rock, sensibility. So I don't think it should be discounted that he is going to send songs to pop radio, and I don't think it should be discounted that a huge reason why he's so successful is because fans from other genres are finding it. One of my good friends literally yesterday posted a screenshot of last night and wrote on it, I'm not usually into country, but this, like the kissing thing. Like, she doesn't listen to country music, but somehow, whether it's on TikTok or wherever this song landed in her ears, she liked it. And so now maybe she'll say, oh, I don't really listen to country, but let me check this Wallen guy out. This sounds good. And that's just better for people that work in the industry. It's better for the artists. It's more fans is always going to be better. So long answer to your question. I don't see why he shouldn't. If he can, put out as many songs. It's not hurting anybody. And if you don't like it, just go to the next one. It's not that hard.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's where I kind of rest too. Like I mentioned towards the beginning of this podcast that I would love to see like something a little more high concept maybe. And that might not even be like, the record that's going to be promoted and be like right in the middle of the album cycle. It might be like an afterthought he puts out later on, because obviously God knows like he has enough songs. He can cut whatever he wants. But a record without a Born with a Beer in My Hand or songs like that, where it's just about him just getting his feelings out a little bit. Because I like these albums. I like Dangerous and I like this one, but I don't feel like there are a whole lot of like really intensely personal moments. And that's something that I would like to see a lot. Like, there are lots of jams, and he does the jams so well. With the pop songs, like I said, I think he's perfected the formula when it comes to these country pop songs. Like Cowgirls and 180, they feel danceable and they feel vibey. Like they would fit right in on pop radio. It doesn't feel like Nashville's like version of pop music, like we've been kind of hearing since like 2016 or so. So that said, like those songs are cool, but I would love to see like just him and an acoustic guitar, like really raw, like maybe even like a work tapey kind of album. It feels like that's the last stone that's not unturned, so to speak, because he's done the country songs. He's like leaned in every point of the spectrum when it comes to like traditional country and like pop country. Like he's covered it all. He's done the actual pop songs, and like now they're sending a steady stream of pop songs to pop radio, which is cool. And it's like you said, it's great for the genre. I love it so much. But that is like the last like little piece of it that I want to see. Is just like solo cuts, not very produced. Because like Wallen's got stories. We know he does. He's lived a crazy, crazy life in the last like 3 years or so since he hit. That's something I just want to see more of. So as we wrap up, Christina, do you have any final thoughts on this record?
Final thoughts. I really like it. I like you said, I think there are a few filler songs, but I also think albums like this, as you listen to them, songs at different points in your life or different points in this year will stand out to you in a different way than they did when you first listened. I think it's one of those albums that you really need to listen to thoroughly. And I don't even know what song it was. There was a line in one of the songs that I was just listening to, and I was like, that's good. and you miss it. The first listen or the second listen, even the third listen, you miss those like really, really good lines. I think one thing that is, fans may not care about, but I think something that's really cool for the people that are in the industry is just how many opportunities he's giving to these rising artists. We were all watching a live last night with Grady, and Ernest popped in, and Ernest was talking about this new wave of writers that are coming up, Blake Prendergast, and John Byron, and they have so many cuts on here, and it's really giving new writers as well as old writers like Ashley Gorley, and obviously Ernest is not an old writer, but he's written a lot of hits so far, giving them their due, but also giving these new artists, these new writers, a really shining light on what their ability is. And so looking at this list, it's just, I don't know exactly how many writers. I'm sure there's somewhere written here where I can count them up, but there is a lot of writers on this album. And I think for the genre, for the career of songwriting, it's a really great highlight on them. It's a great highlight for songwriters, and to cut outside songs that you have not written as that you're a songwriter, but you say, hey, this is a really great song, so I'm just going to cut it. I think that's a really cool thing that he did. So overall, I mean, we'll get our rankings when we post our review, and we'll work all of that in. I know our followers love seeing our rankings, but overall, I really enjoyed it. And I think as it continues to grow and as we continue to see the standouts, and every person's going to have their own personal favorites. So that might be an interesting thing for us to do, is each person in our team pick their 12 and make their own album, because you can do that and they'll all be different. And I think that's the best part of music, is that everybody has different tastes and everybody can like something different, and you get to listen to it as many times as you want and nobody can say anything about it.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I mean, I love just kind of paring it down a little bit and getting my favorites. And like, I mean, for better or worse, I kind of like disregard the rest a little bit, and I'll be listening to like those 12 like in my car all the time. But I mean, the fun upside to that too is that like in 2 years, I might come back to it and I might be like, oh my gosh, like I sold 98 Braves so short. And that's fun too. Like, I mean, that actually happened to me with Somebody's Problem. I was way late to the game on that song. I like listened to it and I was like, yeah, okay. And like 6 months ago, I came back to it and I was like, dang, that's a good song. So it's great how that works that way. And I'm over complaining about the length of double albums and things like that. We're gonna like what we like. We're gonna enjoy the pieces of it that we do, and like I said, just kind of toss the rest until further notice. But y'all, we want to thank you so much for hanging out with us. You can check out that camo Country Central hat at countrycentralshop.com. Keep up with us all week long on Instagram, and until then, we will catch you again real soon with another episode.